Imagine for a moment the gleaming chrome elevator buttons reflecting the light from my parents' designer outfits. My father checks the time on his gold watch for the third time in 2 minutes, while my mother's heavy perfume fills the small space. She nervously adjusts her pearl necklace, a habit she has had for as long as I can remember. "Olivia, darling," she says, in that familiar condescending tone, "are you sure you want to show us your workspace? We could just have lunch at the club instead and forget all about this." I simply smiled, remembering all the times they had refused to visit my tiny office over the past 3 years. No, today was different. They had practically invited themselves because rumors about my financial struggles had started circulating at their prestigious country club. They were worried about their precious family reputation and the family name. "You will want to see this, Mom," I assured her, pressing the button marked P for Penthouse. "Penthouse," my father scoffed. "I think you hit the wrong button, sweetheart. Your little tech company surely cannot afford a parking spot in this building." The elevator smoothly began its ascent to the top of Sterling Tower, one of the most prestigious skyscrapers in the financial district. 3 years ago, when I left my father's investment firm to start my own company, they were horrified. "Madison & Sons has been our family legacy for generations," my father had roared. The fact that I was a daughter and not a son had never seemed to bother him until I wanted to run things my own way. "Remember that startup I told you about?" I asked, watching the floor numbers climb. "The one you said would never work. That ridiculous AI investment platform." My father chuckled. "Do not tell me you're still throwing money at that pipe dream." My mother touched my arm and said there was still a junior vice president position waiting for me at the firm. The elevator chimed at the 15th floor and a young executive entered. His eyes widened when he saw me. "Miss Sterling," he exclaimed, "I did not expect to see you today. The board presentation yesterday was incredible." My parents froze in place and my mother's hand dropped from my arm. "Thanks, Mike," I replied. "How is the new trading algorithm performing?" "Revolutionary, Mom," he answered. "We have already had calls from 3 major banks wanting to license it." He got off 2 floors later, leaving my parents in stunned silence. I could almost see the wheels turning in their heads. Sterling Tower, Miss Sterling, board presentation. Olivia, my father's voice had lost its patronizing edge. "What exactly is going on here?" The elevator continued its smooth ascent. "Remember when I said I had an idea that would change the investment industry? An AI system that could predict market trends better than any human analyst. That impossible idea that would never work?" I quoted his own words back to him. "Yes, that one now handles investments worth over $50 billion. $50 billion, my mother whispered. "No, that is not why I brought you here today," I continued. "You see, when my company took off, I needed a suitable headquarters. And this building. Let us just say I got a very good deal when I bought the whole thing." The elevator chimed one final time. The doors opened to reveal a stunning penthouse office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city. Modern art adorned the walls, and a massive sign behind my desk read, "Sterling Innovations. The place where AI meets investment." "Welcome to my building," I said quietly, stepping out of the elevator. My mother's perfectly maintained composure finally cracked. "Your building. All 60 floors of it," I confirmed, enjoying the sound of my heels clicking on the marble floor. "Would you like a tour? We can start with my tiny office here in the penthouse." My father's face had turned a deep shade of red. "But Sterling Tower is owned by Sterling Innovations." "Exactly," I replied. "My company named after Grandma Sterling, by the way. The one who always told me to think bigger than anyone expected." "But that is impossible," he sputtered. "You have only been gone 3 years. 3 years, 4 months, and 17 days, I corrected him. "Would you like to see our latest quarterly reports? They are quite interesting." A soft knock at the door interrupted us, and my executive assistant, Jessica, entered with a tablet in hand. "Miss Sterling, sorry to interrupt, but Goldman Sachs is online one about the merger. Also, the mayor's office confirmed your lunch meeting for tomorrow." I nodded and told her to give me 5 minutes, while pushing the Goldman call to 3 p.m. My father collapsed into one of the leather chairs facing my desk, looking like he had seen a ghost. My mother remained standing, her eyes darting around the office as if searching for signs that this was all an elaborate prank. "The merger they are talking about on the news is that you," my father's voice was barely a whisper. I sat behind my desk, enjoying the role reversal for the first time in my life. For years I had sat on the other side of his massive mahogany desk, listening to him explain why my ideas were too risky or too different from how things were traditionally done. Yes, that merger, I replied. We are acquiring the AI division of Thomson Financial. It is rather fitting considering they rejected my job application 4 years ago. Would you like to see the numbers? My mother finally found her voice again. But at the Christmas party, you said you were still figuring things out. You were wearing that same old blazer, the one your father said made you look like a junior associate. I smiled at the memory. I wore it on purpose, Mom. Just like I kept my old apartment and drove my used car. I wanted to succeed on my own terms and not because of the sterling name. I wanted to prove that my vision was worth more than the safety of the family firm. But why my father demanded his business instincts finally kicking in? Why hide your success from us? Do you know how many connections we could have provided or the doors we could have opened for you? I leaned forward and looked him directly in the eyes. That is exactly why, Dad. Every door at Madison & Sons was opened by you. Every client came through your name. I wanted to build something that was entirely mine, without anyone being able to say I did it because of my father. But surely after the first year when you started succeeding, my mother trailed off. You mean when I started really dominating the market, I corrected her. I stood up and walked to the window looking out at the city skyline. Let me tell you what happened a year into my venture. Our AI made its first major market prediction, a shift that nobody else in the world saw coming. We made our initial investors a 500% return in just 1 week. That same week, I overheard you at the club telling your friends how worried you were about my failed experiment. You said I would come crawling back to the firm eventually. My father had the grace to look embarrassed and tried to say they were just concerned. No, I cut him off. You were embarrassed. Your daughter, the Harvard graduate, was playing with computers instead of following the family path. So I decided to keep playing my role as your unsuccessful child, while I built something that would eventually change the entire financial world. I pressed a button, and the wall of screens behind my desk lit up, displaying real-time market data and complex investment flows. Our AI does not just predict markets, it understands them on a level humans cannot comprehend, I explained. Every major financial institution in the world now uses our technology. I paused, letting that sink in before delivering the final blow, and that includes Madison & Sons. My father's head snapped up, and he looked at me in pure disbelief. What are you talking about? He stammered. I told him to check his firm's trading software and see who actually provides the back-end algorithm. I watched him fumble for his phone with trembling hands. You have actually been using my technology for the past year, I said calmly. Your recent record profits that you have been bragging about at the club are all thanks to my system. You are welcome. He muttered that it was impossible, but his face told me he was already connecting the dots. The sterling algorithm that everyone is talking about, he whispered. Yes, Dad, it was named after me. Your chief technology officer was quite impressed when he found out who he had been dealing with, but I made secrecy a condition of our contract. My mother's perfect posture finally crumbled, and she sank into the other chair. All those dinner parties where we tried to set you up with successful men like Peter Thomson, she said softly. I laughed because I'm now buying his company. Yes, those were particularly amusing evenings. A soft chime interrupted us as Jessica's voice came through the intercom. Miss Sterling, the board members are arriving for the quarterly meeting, and the reporter from Forbes is here for your cover interview. The silence in my office was broken only by the distant sound of helicopters, probably the news channels, covering our merger announcement. My father was still staring at his phone, scrolling through article after article about my company. My mother had given up all pretense of composure, her perfectly styled hair now slightly disheveled. The board is waiting, I said, standing up and straightening my jacket. You are welcome to stay and watch if you would like to see how your little girl runs a multi-billion-dollar company. Olivia, my father's voice cracked. As he looked at the data, the market capitalization of your company is larger than Madison & Sons. It is 10 times larger, actually, I corrected him, as of this morning's opening bell. I could see the mixture of pride and profound regret crossing his face. The boardroom doors opened, revealing a table full of the most powerful people in finance. My parents followed me in, looking shell-shocked, as CEOs and financial leaders greeted me with genuine respect and deference. Ladies and gentlemen, I addressed the room. You might recognize my guests Robert and Diana Sterling of Madison & Sons. They are here to observe. I caught several knowing smiles around the table. My secret had been well kept in high society, but within the financial world, my identity had been known for months. For the next hour, my parents watched in stunned silence as I led discussions about billion-dollar decisions and global market strategies. They sat at the far end of the long marble table, looking like children in a world they thought they owned. Their daughter, who they believed needed career guidance, was directing the future of global finance with a single nod. Every time I spoke, the room went quiet, and every executive hung on my words. I saw my father lean back and rub his eyes as he realized the scale of the empire I had built in the shadows. As the board members filed out of the room congratulating me on the merger, my father finally spoke up. "Why did you not tell us?" he asked softly, his voice lacking its usual thunder. "All this time we thought you were struggling, and we were ready to take you back in, out of pity." I gathered my papers and looked him in the eye. "You thought what you wanted to think," I replied. "You believed a woman could not succeed in this industry without following your traditional path. You thought innovation was too risky, and that my ideas were just a phase." "We were wrong," Mom admitted, her voice trembling with emotion. "We were so terribly wrong about everything. The funny thing is, I continued walking to the window, that I actually tried to tell you. Do you remember that dinner 3 years ago when I tried to explain how artificial intelligence could revolutionize investment banking? You both laughed and changed the subject to the Hamilton Sons' new partnership. I remember, Dad admitted, looking at the floor. "I did not understand half of what you were saying." "No, you did not even try to understand," I countered. "There is a profound difference between not knowing and not wanting to learn. You were so blinded by your own legacy that you could not see the future standing right in front of you. You saw a girl playing with computers while I was building a machine that would eventually make your traditional methods obsolete. It was not just about the money for me. It was about proving that the world had changed even if you chose to look the other way." The intercom buzzed again, and Jessica told me that the Forbes interview was ready to begin. "Give me a moment, Jessica," I said. I turned back to my parents, who looked like they were seeing me for the very first time. "I have a cover interview to do, but before you go, there is something else you should know." I reached into my desk and handed them a thick blue folder. Inside was a formal legal offer to buy Madison & Sons. My father's hands trembled as he read the opening paragraph. "You are buying our company," he whispered, his face turning pale. "I am offering you market value plus 20%, I said, as I straightened my jacket. "It is your choice. You can either join Sterling Innovations as a subsidiary and modernize your outdated methods with our technology, or you can continue competing against us and lose everything within the next 2 years. I am giving you a way to save your legacy, even if it means it is no longer under your control." My mother gasped audibly as she read the terms of the acquisition. "You would buy your own father's company?" she asked, her voice filled with a mixture of shock and betrayal. I looked at her with a calm that I had practiced for years. "Business is not personal, Mom. Isn't that the very first lesson you ever taught me, Dad?" He looked up from the legal documents, and for the first time in my life, I saw something new in his eyes. It was not the condescension of a parent or the pity of a mentor. It was the genuine respect of a competitor who had been outplayed. He turned the pages of the offer slowly, his fingers tracing the numbers that proved my company was 10 times the size of his own legacy. "When do you need an answer?" he asked, sounding more like a weary businessman than the titan of industry I grew up fearing. "Take your time," I replied. "We can discuss the details over dinner tonight at my penthouse apartment in the building next door. You know, the one you never visited because you assumed I could not afford decent housing and were too embarrassed to see how I lived." My mother's eyes widened again as she realized I owned even more of the city skyline than she had imagined. "You own that building too?" she asked. "Among others," I smiled. "It is amazing what you can acquire when your predictions are accurate, 99% of the time." I watched them process the fact that while they were trying to set me up with successful men, I was busy buying the skyscrapers those men worked in. They had spent 3 years looking down on me from their country club heights, while I was quietly building the very ground they stood on. I walked over to the wall of glass and pointed out at the bustling city below. "Every light you see out there represents a data point that my system has already analyzed." While Madison & Sons was relying on old boy networks and golf course handshakes, I was building a digital brain that never sleeps. I tried to bring you into this world 3 years ago, but you were too comfortable in your mahogany offices to listen. You treated me like a child with a hobby when I was actually the architect of your obsolescence. The silence in the room was heavy with the weight of things unsaid over the last 3 years. My father stood up his joints, appearing stiffer than usual, as he clutched the folder to his chest. He looked around the boardroom again, taking in the high-tech displays and the sleek minimalist design that made his own firm look like a museum. He realized that the world he spent 40 years building was now just a small piece of the puzzle I was putting together. The power had not just shifted, it had been completely redefined. I stepped toward them and softened my voice just a little. This is not about revenge, Dad. This is about survival. If I do not buy Madison & Sons, someone else will, and they will not offer you 20% over market value. They will strip it for parts and fire the people who have worked for you for decades. By joining me, you stay relevant. You become part of the future instead of a footnote in the past. I am offering you a seat at the table I built, because despite everything you are still family. But make no mistake, it is my table now. Jessica appeared at the door once more, announcing that the photographer was ready for the cover shoot. I turned back to my parents for one last look. The choice is yours. You can join the future I am building or stay in the past until it disappears completely. Either way, I have proven what I set out to prove. I showed that success does not have to follow the expected path, and that a daughter can build a dynasty far greater than the one she was born into. As they walked toward the elevator, still clutching the blue folder, my father paused and turned around. That Christmas party, he said, his voice reflecting a mixture of amazement and regret. When you were wearing that old blazer and told us you were still figuring things out. You had already bought this building, hadn't you? I nodded slowly and told him that I had signed the final papers that very morning before the party. He shook his head slowly as the weight of all those missed moments finally hit him. We missed so much of your journey, he whispered. You did, I agreed calmly. You missed the struggle and the late nights and the moments where I almost lost everything. But maybe now you can be part of what comes next. As the elevator doors closed on their stunned faces, I straightened my shoulders and headed toward the photo shoot. Tomorrow the headlines would reveal my identity to the entire world. But today's revelation to my parents felt significantly more important. Sometimes the biggest success is not measured in the billions you make or the skyscrapers you own, but in the moments when those who doubted you finally see you for who you really are. As I posed for the camera for what would become the cover of Forbes, I could not help but smile. My mind drifted back to that tiny first office on the 15th floor. I still keep that original room unchanged with its scratched desk and flickering light. I keep it as a constant reminder that every empire starts with a single room and a dream that others call impossible. The world might see a billionaire on the cover of a magazine, but I still see the girl who was brave enough to bet on herself when no one else would. The photographer asked me to look toward the window, and I gazed out at the city I now helped lead. My parents were down there somewhere, walking through a world that looked the same to them, but had fundamentally changed. I knew that by dinner time, they would have many more questions, but the dynamic had shifted forever. I was no longer the daughter seeking approval. I was the architect of a new era. And as the camera shutter clicked, I knew that this was not just the end of a long secret, but the true beginning of my legacy. The city lights began to flicker on as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the financial district. I walked back to my desk and looked at the empty chair where my father had sat just moments ago. He had spent his life building walls, but I had spent mine building bridges to a future he could not imagine. The skyscraper stood tall as a monument to that vision. My journey was never about taking their place. It was about creating a place of my own where the only limit was the reach of my own mind.